welcome to the Everyday Sublime podcast. I'm your host, Josh Summers, and it's an honor and pleasure to have you here. Today, it's a very special episode. I am joined by Perdita Finn, who co-founded with her husband, Clark, an organization called The Way of the Rose. And this is a spiritual movement that, unlike any I've ever seen, it's a non-hierarchical, non-patriarchal, grassroots kind of spirituality focused on, what's going to sound strange, focused on praying the Rosary. Now, if you've been following my podcast, you know I'm coming from a Buddhist background. I come from a yoga, Chinese medicine background. And my discussion and sharing that I now pray the Rosary may strike you as like a complete spiritual conversion, or maybe that I've just lost my way, that I've fallen into the pitfalls, the trenches of mysticism or mythological thinking. But I hope you'll appreciate that the Rosary itself is not the Christian production that we think it is. It's not indigenous to Catholicism. In fact, the Rosary, as you'll hear, pre-exists almost all modern, if not all modern religions. And as I say, it's the oldest spiritual technology that I'm aware of that our species has ever created. So this is a far-flung, far-reaching conversation. But one of the things that makes it incredibly special is that Perdita and I both invited the presence of my late niece Adelia, who passed away earlier this year. And in invoking Adelia, both formally and in our practice, I would say, we felt her presence with us, and we felt that Adelia's voice was in some ways guiding, directing, and orchestrating part of this conversation. I've never done this before. I don't really even know how to speak to it. All I can say is the path of practice, or the approach to practice, the gate of practice that Perdita and her husband open up is just an incredible gate of practice. It really is incredibly rich, and we touch on so many things that relate to our modern moment. I'm not shying away from this, but in the United States, we just had our November 5th presidential election, and everybody in my blue tribe is reeling, the red tribe is celebrating. Polarization is just as what it was before, and we're exploring in this conversation maybe a way that a new vision, a new imagination can emerge in the desert of the wasteland that we're in. And that's why I call this episode A Desert Rose. On a very personal level, I want to dedicate this conversation, this episode, to my mother, to my sister Meryl, who lost Adelia, to my other sister Rebecca, and to the goddaughter of Terry and me, an informal goddaughter, but a goddaughter nevertheless, Jess. Jess was our friend who first introduced us to Perdita's work, and it's been a vine of roses ever since. So I just want to thank you all for listening. I hope this conversation opens up some doorways and avenues for you to explore. There's a lot of information in the show notes. I linked to many of their books, Perdita's books and her husband's books. I linked to their website. I encourage you to check it out. You can practice with their prayer groups. And I also will say, after the conversation, given the number of synchronicities that Perdita and I felt we were sharing, we are committing to some more conversations. I'm already planning to have her husband on, but particularly Perdita and I, and hopefully Terry at some point will come in, and we're going to continue to flesh out conversations around this incredible practice. So, that all said, without further ado, I now bring you Perdita Finn, A Desert Rose. So, Perdita, before we dive into the heart of your work, I'd like to share a bit of my own story that led me to your teachings and, in some ways, the profound impact they have had on me and my wife.
Thank you.
I grew up amidst the wild, expansive marshes of Marshfield, Massachusetts.
Oh my God.
My father, an adventurer, sailor, and scientist at heart, took us racing on his friend's International 210s at a Falmouth Yacht Club.
Oh, wow.
It's a Buzzards Bay in Vineyard Haven.
Wow.
And for a while before he experienced a depressive collapse in his life, he worked professionally distributing lasers and microscopes to the top surgical departments in many of New England's hospitals.
Wow.
My mom was a career pediatric nurse practitioner for over 40 years. She raised me and my two sisters. Shortly after I was introduced to your work, the first daughter of the next generation passed from a brain tumor.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I have learned to communicate to my niece, Adelia, through your teaching. And that's part of the spirit of why I know my mother is very keen to hear this conversation. I'm going to jump back a little bit again. In the mid-90s, and this won't go on too much longer, but in the mid-90s, when I was an undergraduate student at Columbia University, I studied cultural anthropology with a focus on Asian religion. And I encountered a spiritual and existential crisis at that time. To use some of the language I'm borrowing from you, the contradictions and injustices of empire loomed large. I found myself grappling with despair. In those days, we may have passed each other. I may well have delivered your New York Times. You may have heard me grinding my teeth at the Hungarian pastry shop. You may have seen me just in despair in St. John the Divine.
Yeah.
Anger at that time became my compass, and it propelled me to march with the Yippies, the Panthers, and other progressive movements on campus at Morningside Heights at that time. Eventually, that rage led me to reject the Western world and immerse myself in the East, which ultimately returned me home, pursuing a master's degree in Oriental medicine, diving further into the world of what I'll just describe as IMS, tricycle dharma. Yet, despite my practicing and then working within the systems that your husband, I think, would coin the professional patriarchy of modern spirituality.
He often calls it the upper middle way.
I knew something was missing at that time, or just I carried a longing that I couldn't even name, a heart void that the frameworks of my spiritual practices couldn't quite fit. Earlier this year, a spiritual goddaughter to my wife and I, named Jess, she introduced us to your work through the book Taking Back the Magic. And I want to dedicate this conversation in honor of her, in gratitude to her. So here's the pitch now, or here's the lead up now. When I discovered your work with Clark on the Rosary, I would say you unlocked for me what I could only describe as, quote, the most potent spiritual medicine the species has ever cultivated. Understanding the Rosary in its anthropological and spiritual context, liberated from the smuggler's cloak of Catholicism, opened up a new universe for me. It was a reimagined tantra of goddess practice, accessible to anyone with the heart to pray for their deepest desires and the courage to live into that prayer. In your teachings, I have found not only the divine feminine, but a pathway to heal our severed relationship with the mother the earth herself.
Yeah.
And here we are now, today on November 7th, 2024, 2 days after what many feel to be the most consequential and traumatic election in living memory.
Yeah.
For many, the chaos and trauma feel overwhelming, and I would say our collective psyche seems to be reeling. With this in mind, I'd love to explore with you today how someone, perhaps say a secular spiritualist but not religion person, facing this moment of psychic and political and ecological upheaval, how they might discover the goddess, their desert rose, in the middle of this wasteland of systemic and collective ill health. Thank you so much from my heart for being here.
Well, Josh, we have so much to talk about, not to mention just how much I love Quissit Harbor, which is a place of my dreams. You know.
Which harbor?
Quissit. Did you ever go to Quissit?
I didn't know.
Oh, it's a great harbor right near Falmouth. You know, I grew up, I often in my dreams am sailing Buzzards Bay, the wonderful Buzzards Bay, and the pastry shop. All these are, you know, I'm overwhelmed by the synchronicities. But I want to start with two things. One, Adelia, I'd like to invoke right now. How old was Adelia when she passed?
8.
You know, these soul appointments, I don't think are arbitrary. And I think they're among the hardest things we have to metabolize, which is the death of children who leave too soon. And, you know, I do pray the Rosary, and the Rosary is about a child who leaves too soon. And it's about the horror of that and the pain of that. But I often think these souls may have brief lives, but big work to do. And they show up as big, big souls in our lives. So I'd like to ask for Adelia's guidance in our conversation today, that she weave us into healing intimacy, and that she guide our conversation today in such a way that we can bring that healing to others.
Absolutely.
I try to be a civilized human being is to be caught inside of the propaganda of straight lines, lines of progress, lines of hierarchy, lines of domination, and the fantasy of a single line for a single life, one chance to get it right. And the mercilessness of that short story makes us all feel stressed, exhausted, terrified, and malleable to the powers that be. And it's one of the reasons civilization has tried to cut us off from the healing wisdom and the healing resilience of a very different story indeed. A story of not just birth and death, but birth and death and return. And that I want to talk about, because that's what undergirds everything that I do, is what is the sobriety from civilization? My husband at one point formed a group that came out of Occupy Wall Street with a group of the people who'd sort of instigated that, called Excess Anonymous. How do we sober up from civilization and the catastrophe of everything around us? And that group kind of fell apart with an inability to define sobriety. And it was a question that's plagued us. And I think the sobriety from civilization is to stop living inside the dominance of the short story of a single life. Adelia's story is much bigger than that single life. Her soul is much bigger than we know, and most of it is mystery. Each of us is more than we know. We live inside of mystery. We don't remember where we came from. We don't know where we're going. our little blue-green planet turns around the sun and spends half the day in darkness. And our solar system turns in a Milky Way that turns around dark matter. And dark matter is 80% of the cosmos. And we don't know what it is. So what I'd like to invite people right now is that circular experience was what our ancestors, the vestiges of their ancestral experience of that we call mystery religions. And those are very different than religions. The mystery cults of the Mediterranean had no scripture. They didn't write anything down. And no dogma. They had an experience of birth, death, and rebirth. And if you live inside that eternal reality, every prayer gets answered. Every prayer will be answered. Our lives are answers to prayers we've made in other lives. I do pray to get back to Cape Cod. All the time. It's hard living far away from the ocean. Mm-hmm. But our lives are answers to prayers. And I often ask people, what is the prayer you came into this life holding in your heart? And what is the prayer you will take with you into your next life? You know, when we were hunters and gatherers, we often carried coals with us, embers, so that it's really hard to start a fire with a bow drill. I don't know if you've ever tried to do it. I have. It's really hard. So you held on to those coals, really, like you wrapped them in moss, and there were fire carriers. It was a big role. And then getting the fire going when you stopped for the night was easier if you had these embers. And each of us has those embers in our heart. How do we blow them into a blaze? And what I would ask people today is that the guidance through the mystery of this moment, which feels very terrible in many ways for many people, and I don't want to mitigate what really hard times on the ground are coming for a lot of people and are happening right now and are just going to get worse. But we have to know what we want. Is our prayer for civilization to continue? Is our prayer to keep on driving to Walmart to buy more shit? Or what is it we really want? What is our biggest, wildest prayer we would carry for 7 lifetimes forward? When we begin to walk inside that and begin to ask ourselves that, we may find that what we want is something very different than the world we're living in.
And the world we're living in, many of us come into it conditioned through the addiction you're describing, of addiction to civilization. Yes. And I wonder if you could just put your finger on the hook within that addiction.
I mean, I can talk about this all day. My whole next book is about it. Okay.
And then from there, I'd like to segue into the practice, in a sense, because it's the experience of the Rosary through which things that I can only describe as miraculous begin to open up, or have opened up.
Well, let me talk about the Rosary, this little handful of beads, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so on the one hand, the conservative Catholic Church has made the Rosary synonymous with abortion, the fight against abortion, right? And so people even say, get your rosaries off my ovaries. And that has been actually a pretty conscious attempt to kill the Rosary. Charlene Spretnak, who's the founder of the Green Party, has really documented this in really interesting ways in her book, Missing Mary. But the Rosary has always been a subversive practice within the Catholic Church. And, our book, The Way of the Rose, really unpacks this. I think one of the things I always ask people, so shall we get subversive? Shall we show you? I have a rosary here in my hands. You'll notice it doesn't have a cross on it, but there we go. There's my rosary.
Here's mine.
Hold your rosary in your hand and take a bead. And anyone who's listening, take a bead in your hands. Maybe you have a bead on a necklace. Maybe you have a button on your shirt. If you don't have that, take some fuzz and roll it between your fingers. Roll a piece of wood, a little piece of lint between your thumb and your forefinger. Just roll it between thumb and forefinger. And I want you to notice how that gesture of rolling a bead between your thumb and your forefinger makes you feel inside your body. How does it make you feel, Josh?
Connected to relaxation in my body. There's a descent of awareness. Down.
It gets us into our hands. There's something, it's fidgety. You know, we have fidget spinners to try to create that feeling. But we've been making beads as Homo sapiens for at least 120,000 years. Okay, try to take that number in.
It's
beads,
impossible. It's really hard.
And those are beads that we found that were made from bone. Beads that were made from wood have vanished, and clay have vanished, so they could be another 100,000 years older. And when we have experienced calamity before in ages past, and boy, we have. Our species, during the Mount Toba eruption, all but 5,000 people went extinct on the planet.
When was that eruption that you're describing?
70,000 years ago.
Okay.
Super
right.
eruption.
And many people may be even familiar with this, what is it, the Hamadryas that happened in like 11,000?
Yes. Graham Hancock is really interesting things to say about but we've had calamities. You know, stars fall from the sky, the climate changes, ice ages happen, right? Big calamities happen. And you know what we've done doing them all? We've made beads.
We've held beads. And this is what I was trying to say in the letter, that this is the oldest medicine. Because and you can talk about how it would regulate you physiologically, neuropsychologically, and beyond that. We could measure it.
Do you know why this gesture is so relaxing?
I think it was through you that it mimics the suckling of a nipple.
Yeah, when a baby's born, the first thing the baby does, if a baby's going to live, it's because they can grab the nipple with their thumb and forefinger. And when they grab the nipple, two things happen. One, a hormone called prolactin lets down in the mother's body. It's a glorious hormone. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so ecstatic. I dream of being reborn just to experience it again. It's really nothing like it. It's the same hormone that lets down in a bird's body so it can roost on eggs. And that hormone also lets down in the baby's body. And then the milk comes and the baby eats. And so when we roll a bead between our fingers, we are imitating the gesture of the child at the mother's womb. And we are inviting the milk of the mother to let down into our body. And we literally, they've done far fewer studies on bead practices and mantric practices than they have meditation practices. But when they did this study on old Italian grandmothers who pray the Rosary, and it turned out that their psychological state excelled even the most advanced Tibetan practitioners.
So, okay, that's that. Can we just touch on that for a second?
Yeah.
Because in my sense of this, I've never really done Tibetan Vajrayana practice. My own practice has been primarily Theravada based, mm-hmm. and all its pitfalls and disembodiments. But when I started doing the Rosary and working with the mysteries and just sort of listening through the talks you and Clark have given on these, I experienced myself, and I'd been reading about Jung's approach to active imagination. I realized this was an ancient path into this world, this of the mind, of the heart, and every bit as powerful as a Tibetan tantric practice, but in my own root language, my own home.
Exactly. Your own. It's the indigenous practice that comes to us. So the Rosary is really old, right? Like, it's really old.
And let me just finish one thought here, that there's elements of it that, because you're talking about they had better psychological, spiritual maturity, say, than these Tibetan monks, however that was determined, which I can appreciate because there's something about the balance of inner psychic energies through recognizing sin, confronting sin, forgiving oneself, forgiving others, that I think is this is where there's a vacuum in contemporary secular mindfulness, I think. And
Sin is a really complicated word.
but just in the sense of, you know, confronting unskillful means, or, you know, things that cause.
Most, you know, we have a community, Clark and I, called the Way of the Rose, and I would say that most of the people leave the word sin out of their prayers because they're actually later additions by the church. And I think for women who've been accused of being sinful by the church for a long time, we have, you know, fuck this, you know what I mean? Like, enough already. But I mean, what Clark and I say in The Way of the Rose is to be a civilized human being is to be sinning against the planet.
And I would also say, for me, as coming in from raised agnostic, never stepped into a church until St. John the Divine, really. I come to it as an expression of humility within innate ignorance in a certain sense. So it's not. Yeah, I can see how.
Here's a really interesting thing. The Rosary does I know a lot about Vajrayana practice. My brother was a longtime Vajrayana practitioner, but you know, all these religions always end up in the same problem, right? They always end up with priesthoods who are taking children away from their mothers and abusing them. All of them. Okay, 201. So what are the mothers in the kitchen doing? And I think what's always more interested me is what were the actual mothers and the women doing? You often find they were praying not for exalted spiritual states. They're praying to put food on the table. They're praying to get their kids through an illness. They're praying that their kids find, you know, good partners and that the baby lives. And that is a spiritual earthiness that has a lot of wisdom, and they know how to navigate a moment, right? Like, if you really, this practice began for my husband and me really I've been praying the Rosary for 30 years, but when my daughter became very ill with an illness the doctors couldn't fix, my prayer life became very real. You know, you know, when you're in the ER with a kid you're not sure is going to make it, you're not counting your breath. You're calling for help. You're begging your mother to show up and come to your rescue. And the people who really know about prayer in this moment, you know, I often say, what is it like to live inside of an economy of prayer, inside of an economy of money? Most of our needs, you know, middle-class Americans are met by money. And so the prayer of most Americans is, help me win the lottery, right? Let me win the lottery.
And if I can just refract the sense that I have that this election was swayed by economic perception, in a sense that, you know, the people that vote for the red tribe that was not my tribe, often cited the economy, the bottom dollar, what they had to pay, and so as a culture, the American culture is so defined by dollar value, and I would say doesn't self-reflect on their own individual needs, rather than as a framework for how to, I think, come to a different relationship to what we want from politics.
People are really upset. Can I look at this like a mother?
Please.
And that is like the end stage of my result. If you really want to walk with the mothers, and I always make them plural because the way of the mother is always a way of multiplicity. Kuan Yin has 10,000 hands because that's what mothers know you need. And those 10,000, and if you follow any community back to its indigenous roots, you don't find a singular god, you find a multiplicity of mothers. So among the Kogi people of Colombia, there are the 9 primordial mothers. You go back with the Greeks, there are the 9 muses. You go into Iceland, there are the 9 mothers. Durga and the 9 mothers become the 108 mothers. Mothers know you don't want one god to rule them all. You want as many hands on deck as you can get. Okay? So, but let me think about this as a mother, because I think what we have, the state we find ourselves in, end stage dying capitalism right now, is people feel profoundly unmothered. And civilization has demonized the mother, for so long and made the actual mothering of children impossible for so long. And, mothering used to be something that everyone did in a community, male and female, those with biological children and those without. And we've left it to one biologically overwhelmed woman. Even nursing wasn't the responsibility for one woman. It was a communal responsibility. So people are really... Civilization has taken away the mother and offered addiction instead. Addiction to the civilization, addiction to domination. And people are really scared and upset right now. We're animals living inside the sixth extinction of all life on this planet. We know we're in trouble. And what do people do when they're frightened? When people are frightened, they look for someone to tell them what to do. They look for a strong man. Make me feel safe.
And they also look for simple explanations.
Simple explanations. Demonizing the other is the simplest explanation of all. You hit your hand with a hammer and you yell at your husband in the next room because it's his fault, right? You know what I mean? What? So this simplicity of fascism, right? Fascism is this, we're going to take care of you. You're frightened. We're going to use your fear. What I want to know is, how do we create oases of faith for people? Because the alternative of being frightened, fear creates more fear. So how in this moment do we find deep reservoirs of joy within us? Radical, terrifying joy. Like how can that Dionysian joy, which is what Yeshua was really summoning, and how do we tap into? And the way that we do that in the way of the rose, the rosary has a lot of components, but one of the most powerful things we do, the reason the church wanted to suppress it, is it validates personal prayer. What you want matters.
That was the most radical thing that my ears first really pricked up on. When I heard you describe that the essence of the rosary was to pray for your heart's desire, whatever the hell that heart's desire is, to pray for that. And this is where some of my other questions were going. You link that to the de-addicting to civilization, and I think that was a completely counterintuitive but spiritual mind explosion for me when you line those two up.
Because here's the thing. When my daughter got sick, I was a doctor's daughter. I thought we'd find the best guy in New York. Of course, he was a guy. And he would come up with the best medicine, right? He'd do the best tests, come up with the best medicine. We'd pay him. So we, took out a second mortgage on our house. We spent all our savings. We went and got all the tests. We went all to the best guys. And all the best guys couldn't put my daughter back together again. And we had no money left, and we lost our jobs. And we had nothing. We had a sick kid lying in bed, 17 years old, looking at me, weeping in pain, saying, "Mommy, get me out of my body." And we had nothing except a handful of magic beans. And that's when we began to rely on the economy of prayer. If you want to learn about prayer, don't go to a monk living in a monastery supported by rich donors. Go and ask the migrant on the border who's carried their children from one country to another with nothing but faith. They can teach you about prayer, right? And
your story, I feel we invoked Adelia at the beginning, and I know my sister, her husband, and my mother lived through those hospital nights. Throwing everything that Western science and medicine and every study and potential treatment and everything that resources could give, and it wasn't enough. And in that fire, because it is a fire, I discovered the rosary. And, the way you've described, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit too, the decade of the dead part of the practice, because that has been just extraordinary to ask for help. I've been exploring this in my own community of just inviting people to talk to their ancestors, as you've talked about in your book, Taking Back the Magic. And I think it's a dimension of spirituality that modern landscape doesn't tend to include as much in more secular contexts. And I think it's a gap.
So there are 3 parts of the Rosary, and I want to explain it, which is the Rosary is a circle. It's not a line. And you don't get anywhere praying it. You don't get better praying it. You don't get an award. You don't get a little badge. You just go round and round the merry-go-round. And
can I even add just Adelia wants me to say, you get the next hint of your next step.
That's it. And the next bead. And each bead has a mantra attached to it. And the mantra we pray with the Rosary is the Hail Mary, although in our community people sort of make that their own, and some people do it in Latin or languages of their ancestors, and some people leave out the word sinners, you know what I mean? Like everybody does. I don't say the word God, I have no interest in God. You know, I mean, you make it work for you. Who cares? And that mantric prayer is like purring, right? Mantra is a purring. In fact, I think the word in Tibetan Buddhism for mantric prayer is the same as the word for purring. And it's so that is a settling experience to have a mantric prayer. But that's not the only thing the Rosary does. It's a mystery tradition. So there is a story that you visualize while you pray it. And that story is a story of birth, the mysteries of joy, and the mysteries of birth. The Rosary passes the Bechdel test. It's all about women getting together, talking about their pregnancy, giving birth, dealing with the kids, right? There's the mysteries of joy. Then there are the mysteries of sorrow, which are all about what happens when we lose our children to empire and how empire creates suffering in the world. And then, and here's where the magic happens, there are the mysteries of rebirth and reincarnation. And, that was once a ubiquitous understanding for people. Everything comes back. The moon waxes and wanes, the tide goes in and out, the seasons turn, the rain goes away, the rain comes back. And no one goes anywhere. It's the first law of science. Matter and energy are here. They don't go anywhere. To know that when you pray the Rosary through death, to know that you're enacting and summoning what I was talking about, the sobriety of the long story. We all die. Civilization we live, Elon Musk thinks he can live forever, right? He's like, I'm going to blast off to Mars. I'm going to live forever. It's such a weird, pathetic narcissism, right? Like, who wants to live forever? I don't want to be awake forever. I like to go to sleep and wake up. There's that lovely clarity of going to sleep and waking up. And we do die and are reborn. And every single thing on the planet dies. And everything in the solar system dies. Suns die. And everything and everyone comes back. And if we knew that, that's the sobriety against civilization. There's a meme out in social media that said, we are the daughters of the witches you couldn't burn, right? Like this kind of feminist defiance. And I say, I am the witch you burned. Here I am, I'm back. Everyone comes back. And if we come back and if we know that, then we cannot be defeated.
This phrase, sobriety from civilization, kind of captures my mind. But it seems to necessitate a belief or a belief in a metaphysic of reincarnation, which I can imagine being very difficult for some.
No, actually, I'm going to disagree with you. I don't like belief. Belief, who cares about belief? Everybody needs to have an experience.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So how does...
Experience of reincarnation.
And so how does one come to an experience of reincarnation?
Yeah. In our horrible culture that tries to deny that. One is through children. Listen to your children. Spend time with children. People talk a lot these days about eldership, but real eldership, your great-grandmother, you were born, is your child. And what if you really knew that? And what if you listened? Children will tell you who they are.
Can you say that again? What did you just literally say? What if
your great-grandmother is your child reborn?
So Adelia's mother's great-grandmother's name was Adelia. Mm-hmm. And it's been I'm interjecting because we invited her first, and I have felt all along a sense that this was her soul coming back to, in part, address deeply painful intergenerational trauma.
Sure. And here's the thing, we don't have to heal the dead. We don't have to heal the trauma of our ancestors. They're dead. They can heal us. It's such a relief. And they want to, and there are millions of them. If you know that, I believe you about Adelia. I write in my book a lot about my experiences with reincarnation. And what I have found in talking with people and having conversations with them is that everyone has these experiences. And the question is, how do we cultivate them? How do we create communities, belief spheres, where we can cultivate these memories? So, in Tibetan Buddhism, which you brought up, there's a tradition where, when the Dalai Lama dies, he leaves his finders behind him to come and find his next incarnation. It's a wonderful scene in the movie Kundun about the finding of the next Dalai Lama. But every child is a reincarnated Tulku. Every child is someone else come back. And when we pay attention to children, we would treat children we wouldn't warehouse kids. We wouldn't send them away from us. On election night, we gathered to pray at the shrine of Our Lady of Woodstock Rosary, and people were anxious. And the grown-ups were, putting their prayers forward for peace and clarity and all these other things. And a 10-year-old boy said, I am just praying to remember that I can always touch the earth, and nothing can keep me from touching the earth. I don't know who this 10-year-old boy is, but that's why we don't have any masters or gurus, because they shut up those moments. I was in so many spiritual communities where children were in the back room, and children in the right circumstances can remind us who we are and where we are.
My wife and I were very fortunate to be present when Adelia died.
Oh, wow.
And the week before she died, we had brought our rosary beads to her to hold and touch and bless, and her own function was shutting down. So the last time we saw her, the hour before she died, she was not able to speak. She could only squeeze our finger for yeses. And my wife and I both had this experience that we had one-to-one time with her, and I told her, I said, I imagine you must be very scared. And she squeezed yes. And I said, I can understand why. I want you to know you're going to someplace very safe. And I said, and her parents hadn't discussed much about what was happening beyond death. And I wanted to give her a bit of a spiritual uncle story of my experience or belief that we come back many times, that we've been each other's fathers and brothers. And I told her, I said, at the moment, I said, you were probably my great-grandmother before, and she squeezed hard.
I have full chills as you tell me this.
So that part of her story, I think, I wanted to share that because the phrase you've also used is that the practice is like permaculture, and these prayers, the mantras. When you were speaking to that, I my own experience is it does. I feel like it rototills my consciousness to be open to the mystery and to be available to the signs of the other side, other souls, supports, signaling to me. And it's like an antenna rod to that dimension. And it's been enormously healing for me and my wife.
Well, praying the rosary is just one of the best things. You know, this morning Clark and I were spinning a little bit about the state of the world, and Clark just looked at me and said, let's pray the rosary. You know, like, enough. And it's very, you know, we start the morning praying the rosary together, and then we summon in the ancestors. You talked about summoning in the dead. And that was such a ubiquitous part of the rosary that and that got suppressed, by the way, and got taken away by the church and turned into indulgences and praying for the dead. What used to be was the word rosary had 5 meanings, and one of them was a handful of beads, a rose garden, a collection of stories, female genitalia. If you want to hold your rosary up and think about it, you can. Those beads, right? So you're actually holding the vulva of the mother, right? And then the last meaning is a cemetery or a place for the dead, the land of the dead. I know a lot of psychics because I've spent a lot of time with them, and many of them pray the rosary because it thins the veil. And there's something about that mantric practice of the Hail Mary, of invoking these ancestors, that thins the veil. And so what we often do at Way of the Rose is we call in the dead and ask for their help as well. You know, we used to call all the dead saints. The saints weren't a sort of the church took over that experience with official beatification. But that wasn't what people used to do with the dead. They would just call on them for help, and the dead who showed up, other people shared that experience. Have you asked for help with Adelia with anything? Have you given her any jobs?
So in my my practice of the Decade of the Dead, I have a small cohort which includes my late dog, who left just before the week before she was diagnosed, and so there's something there too. But so the two of them, and a few good friends that have passed in the last few years, and I one by one invite them. I call them by name. I leave some time to invite their spirit, their energy to come join me, and I do ask for help. And it's something that, again, I was raised agnostic. I was a new atheist for about a decade plus. This is very strange territory for me in a way, and yet I do feel personally, like on just a personal level of my own, coming into my own integrity or individuation. I'm just a case study, like you've discovered in your own writing, or written about in your writing, and share it in your channel. Artistic things start to blossom.
Oh.
You know, I've recently gotten back into jazz, and I'm thinking, as you're talking about the rosary and thinning the veil, I'm thinking of Herbie Hancock, and who is obviously. Do you know that he has practiced that? Yes, you've talked about the form of Buddhism that he practices.
My husband is one of the leading experts on the Soka Gakkai Buddhism, which Herbie Hancock practices, and the SGI is fascinating because they're interested in mantra, and they really understand the revolutionary power of praying for your heart's desire, which was born, fascinating, this is our next book, looks at this, in defiance of fascism in Japan. It was their response to fascism was to pray mantras for your heart's desire and to radically empower people against the state. So, yes, we know. I know about Herbie Hancock's practice.
Yeah, and so when people are empowered by their heart's desire, I mean, there's a spirit that's unleashed that.
Unshakable joy, it's called in the SGI.
Yes, but that again, it's a kind of, it's an emphasis or orientation to practice that I find is as I've heard you guys say, there isn't a form of patriarchal religion anywhere, whether it's secular mindfulness or anywhere else, that you're going to find a single path telling you to pray your heart's desire, and that if I can think macro at a meta level, that leads to a spiritual bifurcation in the heart of people because they're always trying to transcend, conquer their own desires. And this is why I think this practice is so tantric, is it transmutes. When you really get into praying your heart's desire, you realize it's not about the next check, it's not about the next acquisition, the next experience you're going to purchase. It's something that you're getting at that crosses lifetimes of purpose.
Well, here's what I also say, and I think it's important to remember. If you have kids and you have to go to work to pay the rent and put food on the table, and you don't have a car, you better pray for a car. I have prayed for a car, and we got a car. We found a black Volvo on the side of the road after our car broke down, and we were praying our hearts out. And nobody could believe we bought this car on the side of the road. It was the best car we've ever had. It didn't cost anything. We paid cash for it. And so here's the radical thing I'm going to say. You can pray for stuff, because that's the wisdom of grandmothers. If you don't have food on the table, pray for food. If you don't have a job you love with all your passionate heart, pray for the work that's meaningful and remunerative. The danger is praying for money. I often say to people, when you start praying for money, say, what do you want? Because maybe you can get it without money, or maybe you can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Let's be playful, and faith happens. Like I'll never forget a woman, a workshop I did, and she was terrified to pray. People are very terrified to ask for what they want. And I said, well, start really simple and earthy, something practical and earthy and simple. And she lived in an area of the world that was in a drought, and she had just planted these trees, and they were starting to die, and she'd been told to mulch them with wood chips to protect them. But she couldn't find any wood chips at any of the garden stores. They were all sold out because the whole area was in a drought. So she decided to pray to her uncle for wood chips. And she went outside and she found a piece of wood, and she put it in front of a photograph in front of him. And she felt like a fool and said, I just want wood chips. Literally 5 minutes later, she heard a beep beep sound of a truck backing up. And it was it was a truck moving into her neighbor's yard. And on the back of the truck was a huge heaping pile of wood chips. And she ran outside and she said to the guy, what are you doing? She said, I'm delivering some wood chips. And she said, can I have some? He said, yeah, sure.
Wow.
That woman looked at me, and you want to know what her next prayer was to her uncle? She wanted love in her life. And she did not feel worthy of love. So then she had to pray to feel worthy of love. I was just planning her honeymoon with her. You know, people, what happens when people's... So you can start with a wood chip.
Yeah, and I want to just jump in really quick and just say, I didn't mean to minimize praying for real material needs. That's essential for sure.
Essential.
But and like you, I have found some surprising material needs for dire circumstances within the last year come forward that in a way that I would never have seen, and it just echoes what you've shared. What I was trying to get at is in terms of de-addicting from the experiences of civilization, or the promise of civilization, the realization of your heart's desire
is everything.
Exactly.
If you have work you love, if you have people you love, if you have community you love, you know, we talk about love conquers hate, but we don't talk about how to cultivate and grow love. We've forgotten how. Mm-hmm. And we have to feel safe, and we have to feel touched, and we have to feel held, and we have to pray a lot. Like, you know, so you pray for love and you get a relationship. Well, you better know how to pray if you're going to enter into a relationship. I've been married for 30 years. If I didn't know how to pray, I'd be in trouble, you know.
Same. I'm only a few months in, but same.
Right, okay. and so love isn't an amorphous thing. It's nitty gritty. It's food on the table, and it's dancing, and it's joy, and we learn how to become an oasis of faith. And when that faith, I want to go back to what you're talking about, creativity. It starts to come to you. One of the things I see that's really profound from people who pray the Rosary or work with the dead is they become ecstatically creative. Ecstatically creative. They start singing. They start painting. they start making stuff. I mean, we see this in the Middle Ages. It's an explosion of glorious devotional art. The troubadours, the stories of King Arthur, the tarot. This all comes from rosary devotion.
And that just blows my mind. It's incredible. Keep saying more.
Yeah, well, you know, it's the rosary is a story that invites us to tell our story. It doesn't give us a story, right? It doesn't. What fascism does is it tells us what we want. It tells us how we're going to get it, and it tells us what story to believe, right?
Can you give that example? Like, spell that even more. Illustrate that fully through.
Christian fundamentalism. Here's the story. Women are bad. Men are good. Listen to God and do what you're told. Okay? Everything was great in the 1950s, right? You know, I mean...
So you're calling Christian evangelism fascism. Can you think
yes.
of it?
I mean, I think all religions are fascist. I mean, and you know, we have degrees of fascism, right? There, you know, and you know, it's fascinating to me how many members of Opus Dei and conservative Catholicism are involved in the current fascist uprising in America, and that's worth exploring. But yeah, you know, you have somebody on high telling you what to think and what to do and how to behave, and silencing your own imagination and intuition and oppressing it. And it's the suppression of the personal. My husband speaks about this much better than I do in some ways, I think, but I can hear him nodding in the other room. Anybody can correct me.
Well, he'll get his day. He'll get his day.
He's better about this. But he's really thought about what does it mean. You know, so what used to happen when my grandmother went to church? It's just little old lady in Haverhill, Massachusetts, Irish lady. She's going to church, right?
I used to teach there, actually. I know Haverhill well. Yeah.
Wow, that's where a lot of my folk are from.
Okay.
In the shoe factories there. They came over from West Ireland there. And so she goes to church. She goes to Mass in the morning. And the priest is speaking in Latin, and he's got his back to the congregation. This is pre-Vatican II. He's doing his magic voodoo up there. Meanwhile, she's in a back pew with 6 other women, and they're praying the rosary together. And they're praying about their damn husbands, and they're praying about the kids, and they're praying about their drunk father, and they're praying about how to pay the bills. And they're doing their magic. And the rosary was always an alternative to this public spectacle. Fascism loves the spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things about our rosary circles is they're not very performative. They're very cozy.
Yeah.
They're just very ordinary. But people experience radical intimacy because when you know what someone's praying for, you know what's inside their heart. And when you can share what's inside your heart with somebody else, you feel known and seen, right? People feel so unknown and unseen.
And that just to open up that second mystery of the joyous mysteries of when Mary and is it the sister's name, is it Karen? Elizabeth. They get together to share that they're both conceived. They're both.
Okay, this is the best. Okay, so the mysteries are not scripture. They're not dogma. They're mystery religions. Mm-hmm. And the mystery religions, I could go on forever talking about. I recently did a lot of work with my friend Robert Moss. I don't know if you know him. He's a wonderful dream archaeologist. And what I realized is the mysteries are like shared dreams that we dream into together.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're
Beautiful.
Dreams that we share. And what we're invited to do is to daydream inside these daydreams and make them our own. But what happens?
Which is why I called it active imagination. It's why people get so imaginative and creative when you're praying the rosary. It's a story that invites you to tell your story. It's a song that invites you to sing your song. Definitely.
So here's the thing, and this is for this moment today. Let's think. I'm going to invite everybody to go to this. So Mary, who is a young woman, unmarried, by the way, not a damn teenager. The word that's used to describe her, virgin, in the ancient text would have meant she was an independent woman. It has the same root as virility. a virgin Athena, a virgin goddess, was a goddess who took lovers, but she was complete in and of herself. She could produce life from her own body. And so this young woman, who's miraculously pregnant, goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is an old woman who is also miraculously pregnant. And these two women, a young woman and an old woman, both carrying life within them, get together, and you know what they talk about? Revolution. And that's in Scripture. The Magnificat is, they say, in order for these babies to be born into the world, the rich must be brought down, the world must be transformed, civilization must be destroyed. We need to create a whole new way of life. It's the Magnificat. And most people don't go and read it. You know the Bechdel test, which is how do you tell if literature is truly feminist? It's a famous test for judging media in feminist circles, in which if two women characters have a conversation together about something other than a man, it passes the Bechdel test.
This one doesn't. This one sounds like it doesn't pass the test.
It does, because they talk about revolution. They talk about changing the world. These two women.
Wouldn't that be classified as talking about the male empire?
No. They mean like a man they want to marry. You know what I mean? Like
okay.
Usually the problem about you almost never see two women talking together in a movie about something other than a man who's a love interest.
Gotcha.
And so it does pass that, and it's a really radical moment. But what it is I think that life within us is the heart's desire. When two people who are both claiming an impossible heart's desire begin to get together, anything is possible.
Why did you call it an impossible heart's desire?
Well, because, so Mary's pregnant without a man. That's an impossible thing. Elizabeth is pregnant postmenopausally, also impossible. And we found a car at the side of the road that we could afford and that we drove for 6 years. That was my personal miracle. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I want to ask you, because I can imagine a listener, she's talking about this virgin birth, and they will categorically reject that based on the worldview that they have. But in terms of a symbol of spiritual meaning or mythic psychic meaning, I really feel like you speak to that. What is that creative spark that's getting born within life, that's held within and guided within the mystery of those.
There's so much to say, and my husband and I did a whole series on the 15 mysteries called Initiation to Mystery, where we just do nothing but talk about how to play with them. And that's up on our website, wayoftherose.org. But, the virgin birth, is used in conservative circles to say Mary was a good girl who didn't have an abortion. She was a 13-year-old raped by God, and did what she was told. And that's really the way it's sort of translated. But it's actually something else. Parthenogenesis is how a lot of life happens. Sex as a means for reproduction is a more recent it and evolutionary experience. Mm-hmm. There are sharks that have experienced parthenogenesis in zoos, and they don't really know how it happens. In terms of Tantra, for the Middle Ages, they did not see it. The Hail Mary is actually a tantric prayer. So, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. What you're really praying to at that moment is the sexual union of the God and goddess, the Lord and the Lady. And medieval people actually visualized that. They actually felt that Mary, when you said that part of the prayer, Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Sorry about this.
No problem.
There's someone at the door. He's been so good up till now, my puppy. Experienced sexual bliss. And that it was very erotic and it was alchemical. And even the Rosary was seen as an alchemical prayer with it rotating Our Father, Hail Marys, Our Father, and Hail Marys, so that the alchemical joy of the Rosary, I can remember once going to a Tibetan visualization practice, where you did a visualization of the god and goddess in tantric union, and their fluids flowing down into you as golden wisdom into your body. It was a very intense day. But the Rosary does that too. I mean, that's what you're praying to. Hail, Lady, full of grace. The Lord is with thee. The beloved is with thee.
And that's so. If I can just reflect back on that, what you're describing is, again, you don't get better at it. You just do it, and however you do this practice, it does bring you to this intimate union.
It does, and it's so wonderful. We have children who come and pray. 5-year-old kids can pray with old women, and there was a boy. I love listening to kids pray because they're so uncomplicated about their heart's desire. They have so much to teach us, right? But this one kid came and he said, I want to be a famous musician. I want to be a rock star when I grow up. And this old lady across the thing said, oh, I am so sick of rock stars. How come I'm always surrounded by rock stars? And then the kid said, I want to be a nice rock star. It was this moment. You know what I mean? Like,
I get it.
It was so great.
Yeah, yeah.
And so union with the divine, but union with our hearts. What happens when we're intimate with our own hearts is we can be really intimate with each other.
And that's part of the intimate with each other, transcending. We could come full circle, transcending tribalism through an ability to be intimate. And I really do. I think the movement I see you and your husband creating with your way of the rose. Have you read Amitav Ghosh's work at all? Yeah, I figured. Okay, so
yeah, all of it. Of course.
A small biography. I never studied with him directly, but he was college friends with a woman I worked for in India, and I've kept up following his stuff. But he talks about if there's real change going to come, how it's going to come from a grassroots movement of hearts reimagined, essentially.
Hearts reimagined. We've got to tell new stories. I think one of the things about this moment that I would say is we need to start telling a new story. And we've got to imagine a new story. I think there's a lot, if the white nationalist movement is nostalgic for the 1950s, I think the left has also been nostalgic for the 1960s. We've got to imagine something else. And we're going to have to cultivate that creative, imaginative something else. And I think we're going to have to find something that's more collaborative with the natural world.
Yeah. No, return to nature, a connection to nature, and a liberation of a kind of a creative imagination that is not addicted to the false promises of empire.
I just talked, I read in the book I'm finishing right now about my own sobriety from sugar and how I got sober from sugar. Sugar's been my real personal addiction, and we all have some addiction in this culture. And, another friend of mine, she got sober from sugar and talked about how her medium skills improved. And my son said the moment he's sober from, alcohol, pot, sugar, all this stuff. And he said, that's what we need right now is radical sobriety. Because we need to be able to hear and listen to what the world is saying to us.
And things beyond this side of the world are saying to communicating to us.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, thank you.
That's what you meant, yeah. Perdita, I'm aware of our time, and I really want to just thank you from the bottom of my heart. This has been an enormously fantastic conversation. I want to give you a few minutes, though. Is there any final thoughts, final message? Again, this is my first post-election conversation, and I'm honored to have it with you. I think the practices that you describe, and I'll be including all these links in the show notes, are just phenomenally valuable for people right now. And I just want to thank you.
Well, here's the thing I wanted to say. Friendship is pretty magical. And I want to invite people, I wanted to invite you tonight. I have a rosary circle at 8 o'clock. And there will be people coming to pray for their heart's desire. What do? They get together, they pray the rosary out loud, they tell their own story. We call in the dead, we ask for help, and it takes about an hour. And you come week after week, and the magic is profound. And there will be old women there, there will be young people there, people from all over the world, and they come, everyone weaving their hearts together is really, really powerful. It's very ordinary looking, and it's absolutely profound. And I'd like to, we offer 8 to 10 circles a day. I'll tell you, everything we do at Way of the Rose is 100% free, no money. Nothing costs anything.
It's an incredible model you've created.
No one gets paid anything. And then we also have, because there's no money, a lot of the bad actors don't show up because they can't monetize us. No one's, and also then there's no inner and outer circles of donors, the advanced donors, and nothing. Yeah. Everything is 100% free. We also have no leaders, no experts. So there are people who what we call root a circle, which is they open the Zoom room and they invite everybody in, but anyone can root a meeting. In fact, we have a script, so even if you've never been to a meeting, you could root a meeting. Mm-hmm. And the tradition of 12 steps, that other radical spiritual tradition that we've been fascinated by. You don't have to pray the rosary before. You can have never prayed a rosary before and come and lead the rosary in our group, and I've seen people do it, and it's absolutely fabulous. And you can come and not participate and just listen. The only thing we say we have no theology. Ecology, not theology, is our motto. You can pray to the lady by any name you want to call her. We don't care what you believe. We don't care what group you're part of. We don't espouse any political points of view. All we ask is you pray for your heart.
Yeah. And may people pray for their heart, and may that heart heal.
Hearts are real.
Yeah.
Hearts are real. Love lasts. That's how we find each other again. That's how Adelia came back to your family, and that's how she'll find you again.
Yeah. From me, from my family, my mother, my sister, my wife, Jess, from all of us, Perdita, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your wisdom. It was a real honor to have you.
Oh, it was a delight to be here, Josh. I wish we were going to just make a cup of tea, though, and settle down for like hours of conversation.
Well, I'd love to have you back, and I'll reach out so we can follow up, and we'll have to keep exploring it. I feel the same way, and we live in.
Where are you located?
We're in Maine. We're in Mid-Coast Maine, just outside Freeport.
Well, okay. First of all, we've got a lot of Way of the Roses in Maine that are really fun. But come to the feast day. It's a blast.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. We're trying to make that work out.
Oh,
so
it's so much fun.
We'll be coming for sure.
Oh, excellent.
But we'll be in touch soon. And thank you again. Really lovely. Thank you.
And thank you for the honor of getting to meet Adelia. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you. I prayed the rosary before we came on and asked for her help. So as soon as you started to speak to that, I said, okay, it's all happening. And it was very meaningful to have you speak with her. Yeah.
Blessings to your whole family.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Blessings to your family too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.